We have now come to Act 4, and as mentioned in the preceding lessons, the action has intensified, the emotions have intensified, so indeed we are almost balanced on a knife's edge, so to speak. So in Act 4, our title is Diseases Desperate Grown by Desperate Appliances Are Relieved or Not At, or once again, the theme of corruption and decay and disease is mentioned. We see there is a photograph of a young woman who is Ophelia, and she is immersed in water. And this suggests the deaths of so many of the other characters, including Ophelia's death. We now come to Act 4, Scene 1, and once again, the action has moved. We find ourselves in a room in the castle, and Claudius is informed by Gertrude of Hamlet's absolutely erratic behavior, as well as Polonius' death, because this is a political crisis that both of them are facing. And Gertrude says that her son is as mad as the sea and wind when both contend which is the mightier. So if we think of a storm and the waves are crashing on the shore and the wind is blowing to such an extent that it can cause much damage, we see that this natural phenomenon then explains Hamlet's absolutely violent behavior, as well as his total insanity, suggesting that he is on a course of total destruction, not only for himself, but also for others who manage to find themselves in his wake. Note that at no point does Gertrude actually divulge all the details of the conversation that she had with Hamlet. She does not share with Claudius Hamlet's request that she severs her relationship with him and that she stops sleeping with him. She also does not mention the fact that Hamlet had accused Claudius of murder, and it did so in no uncertain terms. So we need to ask the question, is Gertrude trying to protect her son? Claudius realizes that he had actually been Hamlet's intended target, and luckily for him, he had escaped death. So once again, he acts decisively because he realizes the political fallout that will inexorably follow as a result of Polonius' death. So Claudius once again acts decisively, and he says, the sun no sooner shall the mountains touch, but we will ship him hence. And this vile deed we must with all our majesty and skill both countenance and excuse. So he realizes that he has to deal with this crisis very diplomatically, because he will have to countenance, meaning he will have to face a barrage of questions that will be posed because of Polonius' sudden death. And he will also have to find a way to justify and excuse, to a great extent, Hamlet's actions. And so once again, we see that Claudius has this personal crisis which he is experiencing, as well as the political crisis which he now basically has to explain away. And the diplomat and strategist once again comes to the fore. The action in scene 2 moves to another room in the castle, and we know that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern have been instructed to find Hamlet, and they do eventually find him and ask him about Polonius' whereabouts. Once again, he puts on an antic disposition and he mocks the king and calls Rosencrantz a sponge. He says he is a sponge because he soaks up the king's countenance, his rewards, his authorities. And he says that the king keeps them like an apple in the corner of his jaw. When he needs what you have cleaned, it is but squeezing you, and sponge, you shall be dry again. So he is suggesting very strongly to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern that they are being used by Claudius, and once the functionality has expired, and then he probably will get rid of them as well. Hamlet's mockery of his old friends highlights the depth of his disgust with them. His cutting remarks and lack of remorse for Polonius's untimely death shows very clearly that he is indeed, or has indeed, transitioned from the deep philosophical thinker to an absolutely brutal killer. Finally, in Act 4, Scene 3, a hall in the castle, Hamlet is brought into the presence of Claudius. Claudius displays reluctance to prosecute Hamlet for the murder of Polonius, because it is indeed murder. Simply because he realizes that Hamlet is very popular with the people of Denmark, and he also realizes, because of his popularity, the masses will actually excuse the deed that he has committed and would rather examine him as the person and not want him to be prosecuted for this deed. So one gets a sense that Hamlet is extremely popular and possibly had been touted as the future king. He uses macabre wit to engage with Claudius about the whereabouts of Polonius's body, and it also gives Claudius a message implying his intentions. So the gauntlet has now been thrown down, and Claudius and Hamlet both know where they stand with each other. In actual fact, the gloves have basically come off. He refers to a worm, which is the ultimate equalizer between a beggar and a king, and he greets Claudius as his mother. And in doing that, he then emasculates Claudius, making him understand fully that he does not respect him at all. We notice that once again, Claudius presents a soliloquy to us. His intentions become very, very clear. And you know, those letters that Hamlet had referred to earlier in his conversation with his mother, Claudius now indicates to us that those letters contain a request for the English monarch to have Hamlet executed once he reaches the shore of England. You know, he says, "Do it, England, for like the hectic, like a fever in my blood, he rages, and thou must cure me." So Claudius sees Hamlet as almost like a disease, and that he needs to be cured of. And so also at this point we see a frazzled Claudius. In the preceding acts, he was extremely calm, very collected, and very charming and diplomatic. But here we see Hamlet indeed is quite calm, vis-a-vis a terribly unsettled Claudius. Act 4, Scene 4 is a very short scene, and it takes place near, in a plain, or at a plain near a port in Denmark. A plain is an open piece of ground, and we are told that Fortinbras is in Denmark en route to Poland. Hamlet reflects bitterly and compares himself to Fortinbras and his soldiers, who are actually prepared to die just for a chance at honor, while he, who has a much greater reason to act, has failed once again to act. And so once again he is self-deprecating, he is angry at himself. How stand I then, that I that have a father killed, a mother stained, and let all sleep? So Hamlet vows, from this day forward may all my thoughts be bloody. And he promises to focus every fiber of his being on revenge. Once again, the audience becomes aware that Fortinbras is a foil for Hamlet, and that unlike Hamlet, Fortinbras is hell-bent on avenging his father's death, even if it means that he has to take a detour and delay his actions in order to achieve his ultimate goal. It frustrates Hamlet immensely because he realizes that his indecisiveness has led him to not fulfilling his promise to the ghost. A few weeks have transpired since Hamlet's exile to England, and Gertrude, in this particular scene, and Horatio are having a conversation about Ophelia's state of mind, and they are deeply concerned. Ophelia then enters while they are having their conversation, and she is extremely disheveled and carries a flute and sings of her dead father and lover. Both Horatio and Gertrude are appalled and probably deeply saddened by Ophelia's transformation. Note these sexual references in the song. And when you listen to the song, it alludes to a possible sexual relationship between Ophelia and Hamlet. So it seems as if the relationship between this young couple had been much closer than the audience as well as their parents had possibly anticipated. Some of the lyrics are, before you tumbled me, you promised me to wed. And so the word tumbled is a reference to the sexual act. Ophelia is unable to cope because she has lost all the male figures in her life. Think about it. Her father, who had controlled her throughout her life, even telling her what to think as well as what to do, has been killed by Hamlet, the young man whom obviously she had affections for. He, in turn, had enjoyed destroying her composure. He had insulted her and toyed with her affections. Her brother is in France at university, and so by all accounts, she must feel terribly isolated. And so thus we see that as a woman, she cannot function independently. And she must have been quite a not very strong-willed even, so that mentally she fragmented very, very quickly. We also realize that at some point, Hamlet must shoulder some of the blame for Ophelia's destruction. Not just the fact that he killed the father, but also the fact that he brutally, verbally assaulted her, which obviously has contributed to her mind fracturing as it has. Claudius notes, this is the poison of deep grief. It springs all from her father's death. And so you can decide who should be held accountable for Ophelia's death. If it is, for Ophelia's insanity, is it only her father's death which has brought it on, or is it a combination of events which have transpired? Ophelia has now left the room, and Horatio has been instructed to follow her so that he can make sure that she is safe. There is a noise from outside, and we are told that Laertes and a rabble have marched onto the castle. So what is a rabble? A rabble is basically a crowd, a rowdy crowd that Laertes has amassed outside, and they have marched onto the castle. We can understand it probably has something to do with the murder of his father. Laertes then states his intention to avenge his father's death, and he thinks that Claudius is actually responsible for his father's murder. And Claudius obviously has to defend himself. While he's having this confrontation with Claudius, Ophelia enters, and Laertes is startled to see her. She's singing songs once again, she's speaking in riddles, and she hands out flowers, rosemary and pansies to Laertes, fennel and columbines to Gertrude, rue and daisies to Claudius. Now, all of these flowers held symbolic meaning in Shakespeare's time. So the rosemary is for remembrance, and that she hands out to Laertes. The pansies are for thoughts. The fennel is for flattery, and the columbines for infidelity. So let's look at what she has given to Claudius. She gives him rue and daisies. And so the daisies suggest that he then had seduced Gertrude. So if we look at the flowers that Ophelia hands over to each individual, it speaks something about their conduct during the course of the play. So it shows us that Ophelia perhaps was not as dim-witted as people might have assumed, but she was also quite astute and intelligent enough to know what was happening around her, despite her father's attempts to control her. Laertes, you must note, is extremely hot-headed and very impulsive. And we also see that he is easily manipulated by Claudius. And what the playwright demonstrates is that action without much thought is as calamitous as too much thought, sans action, as in Hamlet's case. So Claudius placates Laertes, who demands vengeance for his father's death. Now, if you look at Laertes' actions, he basically wanted to attack the king, and that is tantamount to treason. So surely he must not have been thinking logically at all. Here, once again, we are reminded that he is a foil for Hamlet. The one is somebody who is steeped in thought, and as a result, he is indecisive and does not act. The other one seems to act without thinking at all of any of the consequences. Once again, we move into another scene, and Horatio gets a letter from Hamlet, wherein he informs Horatio how he sent Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to England. He describes how he had managed to board a pirate ship which had attacked them. So the story basically is the following. Hamlet had boarded the ship which was supposed to take him with England, and he'd been accompanied by Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. En route to England, that particular ship was attacked by a pirate ship. And you know, when in the old days, when there was an attack on a ship, the two ships would basically sail close to each other, and the sailors from the one ship would then move on to the other ship in the melee or the fracas caused by the fight. And as a result, somehow, we are not given any details, Hamlet finds himself on the pirate ship. And once the fight is over, the ship which he had previously sailed on then sails off to England once again, and somehow mysteriously Hamlet is left behind on the pirate ship, and we must assume that he then negotiated with him to set sail for Denmark and then allow him to disembark in Denmark. He also asks Horatio to give Claudius letters informing the latter of his return to Denmark. He also requests from Horatio that he meets up with him so that he can update him about the sequence of events which had transpired. The new Hamlet, although we do not meet him in the scene, is very capable, it seems, of decisive action and brutality. He's resolute. The letters is evidence of Hamlet probably challenging Claudius once again. We now know that the old Hamlet indeed had died. The thinker, the philosopher, the procrastinator is no more, because by killing Polonius, Hamlet has actually sealed his fate. There is no turning back for him at all. So all he can do is he needs to continue with the plan of revenge, and we get a sense that he is somehow moving towards some kind of crisis and even death at this point in the drama. It is Act 4, Scene 7 at Elsinore, and it continues the discussion between Laertes and Claudius. And during their discussion, obviously, Claudius also receives the letters from Hamlet, which includes the words, "High and mighty, you shall know I am set naked on your kingdom." So we can see therein is a threat, and Hamlet's tone is very sarcastic as well, referring to Claudius not as your highness, but high and mighty, suggesting that you will not be high and mighty for much longer. So Claudius tells Laertes that he could not act against Hamlet for two reasons. Firstly, Hamlet is very popular with the masses in Denmark, and if Claudius has acted against him, and then he possibly could have lost his hold on the throne. Also, he claims that because Gertrude loves her son deeply, he could not hurt her by prosecuting her son. He says, the great love, the general gender bear him, and the queen who is so conjunctive to my so conjunctive, suggesting that they are very close and he has the best interests at heart. And so Claudius gets Hamlet's letters, and both Laertes and Claudius see this as an opportunity for revenge. And what Claudius does is he goads Laertes. So he realizes that indeed Laertes is fired up and ready to avenge his father's death, and he takes advantage of the situation. And he asks him the question, what would you undertake to show yourself your father's son indeed more than in words? And Laertes' response is that he will go to the extent of to cut Hamlet's throat in a church. Notice the extent of Hamlet's anger. It is even heretical. He does not have any respect for the church or for God, for that matter. And so we can see the difference between Laertes and Hamlet. Hamlet has a deeply philosophical, even religious nature, whereas Laertes has no compunctions about whether his actions are sinful or not. Both men are then quite astounded to hear that Ophelia has died. And at this point in the drama, it is unclear whether the cause of her death is suicide or accidental drowning. It is Gertrude who explains what had happened to Ophelia. And she says, she fell in the weeping brook, till that her garments, heavy with their drink, pulled the poor wretch from her melodious lay to muddy death. But we also know that Ophelia, whilst she had fallen into the river, or possibly thrown herself into the river, had not reacted in a frantic manner. Rather, she was still speaking in riddles, and she was still singing, apparently, when her clothes became waterlogged and she was then dragged down. And so here we have Ophelia as a female foil for Hamlet. She had full-blown madness, where Hamlet pretends to be insane, and then whereas Hamlet had thought about committing suicide, Ophelia indeed, in her state of insanity, had indeed possibly committed suicide. Laertes is now all fired up to get revenge for his father's death, and Claudius has absolutely manipulated him and channeled his anger into assisting Claudius in his plan to get rid of Hamlet. So very brilliantly done. And so ever the manipulator and the plotter, he then presents his plan to Laertes, and he says that they will lure Hamlet into a duel with Laertes. And what is going to happen then is that Laertes' rapier or sword will not have a foil. So what is a foil? A foil is a little button or even a cork that people who duel with rapiers put at the or on the tip of the rapier to prevent any harm from befalling the duelists, especially if it is for sport and not a duel to the death. And the duel will ostensibly be one of sport. Claudius also flatters Laertes' swordsmanship in order to exact his revenge. And note, Claudius is an excellent adjudicator of people. So he realizes that, if Laertes is going to be flattered, and then there are certain things that he can then encourage Laertes to do. He also claims that, and makes up quite an elaborate story, that Hamlet is quite jealous of Laertes' swordsmanship. And Laertes agrees to the fight, and he says that he will even make sure the plan works, because besides the fact that he will not use a foil, he will then also put poison on the tip of his rapier to ensure that Hamlet dies. He says, I'll anoint my sword. I bought an unction, a poison, so deadly or mortal that but dip a knife in it where it draws blood, it may be death. Claudius then says, he will prepare a chalice. A chalice is a cup, and he will fill this goblet or cup with poison. And if Hamlet, during the course of the duel, if Hamlet should become thirsty, will offer the chalice to Hamlet, who will then drink the poison. So here they have a basically 3-point plan to kill Hamlet, and you can see it's virtually foolproof. By the end of this act, note it is the penultimate act of the drama, the gloves are off. Okay, Hamlet knows exactly where he stands with Claudius, and Claudius knows exactly where he stands with Hamlet. And so whereas Hamlet is very open and honest, Claudius is far more deceptive, and he plays dirty in essence. Hamlet is determined to avenge his father's death, and in this act, we note that Hamlet's obsession with revenge and his erratic behavior up until this point have caused quite a lot of disorder at court. He has succumbed to fits of madness. He cruelly rejected Ophelia. He berated his mother for her hasty incestuous marriage to Claudius, and he killed Polonius in a fit of madness. So he too must take some blame for the rot and corruption that has now erupted in the Danish court, and indeed which is also making Denmark as a country unstable. Claudius knows that Hamlet is his enemy, and that he is an even greater threat to him than he was before, because his plan to have him executed in England has failed. And this is proven by the letter which Hamlet has sent to Claudius, saying to him, I am back, and I am set naked in your land, so you can expect to see me soon. Ever the strategist and politician, Claudius realizes that he can use the impulsive and aggrieved Laertes to kill Hamlet, so that he himself is not implicated in Hamlet's death, and so his death might appear to those around him as being quite accidental. Laertes then demonstrates also that his impulsivity and inability to rationalize contribute to him making rash and irresponsible decisions. For example, like raising a rabble to attack the castle. As mentioned before, this is a highly dangerous and treasonable act, and he could have been executed for it. We also note that Laertes is as unscrupulous as Claudius is, because he does not even hesitate in considering to not play foully in the duel with Hamlet. So both these men basically are out to ensure that Hamlet's death occurs and that they will then not achieve their goals.